My mother deleted my hotel reservation while we were still flying to Hawaii, then calmly told me I'd have to find some cheap motel on my own. Just 2 minutes after I made a single phone call, all of their presidential-level luxury, and every smug smile on their faces, started slipping away. The receptionist's smile slowly faded. At first, she wore that polished expression hotel employees are trained to have, the kind that feels warm and welcoming behind a flawless marble front desk. Her smile was bright, practiced, and effortless. But then she looked down at her computer screen, and that cheerful look disappeared. It was replaced by something much more cautious. When she looked back at me, she had the expression of someone who had just discovered bad news that wasn't her fault, yet somehow she was going to be the one dealing with it. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said softly, lowering her voice. "This reservation was canceled yesterday evening." I'd been in the air for 6 hours. Outside, a light July drizzle was falling, which wasn't exactly the tropical Hawaiian welcome you'd expect from a 5-star resort. Inside the lobby, polished marble floors reflected the soft lights overhead, while the cool air carried that expensive mix of fresh flowers and perfectly chilled air conditioning. The lighting alone probably cost more than my first apartment. My carry-on bag rested beside my feet, and my neck still ached from spending the flight squeezed into the middle seat. I'd originally booked a window seat near the exit, but somehow my reservation had mysteriously been changed during check-in. I didn't move. Deep down, I was already starting to understand exactly what had happened. I just needed one more second to let it fully sink in before I turned around. 1 second later, I faced them. My sister, Olivia, was already smiling. I'd seen that smile my whole life. It always arrived slowly, thin and cold, almost like a lizard creeping toward its prey. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and couldn't wait for everyone else to realize there was nothing they could do to undo it. "2 of Ethan's brothers flew in from the mainland at the last minute," she said casually, flicking her hand as if she'd already finished the conversation in her mind. "They needed rooms on the VIP floor. You're single, so I figured you wouldn't mind." I opened my mouth to answer. Before I could say a word, my mother, Diane, stepped in. She appeared beside my left shoulder with the speed of a woman who had spent 30 years controlling every situation before it turned into a scene. "Don't you dare," she whispered into my ear. Her quiet voice somehow cut through every sound in the lobby. "This is a special weekend. Olivia is the guest of honor. Her future in-laws will be here in an hour. You can find a motel somewhere off the highway. You'll survive." Then she stepped back. She looked at me the way someone looks at a disappointment they no longer have the energy to hide. She was wearing a dark blue dress, practical ballet flats, and carrying the same handbag she'd bought 3 years earlier. It still looked almost brand new because she took care of everything she owned. "Maybe next time," she said, her voice returning to its normal volume, "you'll learn not to embarrass this family by showing up at a 5-star resort looking like an exhausted secretary." My father, Thomas, stood about 3 feet away with his phone in one hand while the other wrist was turned just enough for his Rolex to catch the light. He never even looked up. "This weekend is about Olivia," he said flatly. "Not about your feelings. Just handle it quietly." They all stood there together. Olivia wore that razor-sharp smile. My mother looked disappointed. My father admired his watch. Ethan, Olivia's husband, a man I'd met exactly 4 times, stood quietly beside her. As far as I could tell, his greatest talent was waiting for someone else to tell him what to think. He watched everything with the blank expression of a man waiting for instructions. They expected me to cry. They expected me to quietly grab my suitcase, disappear through the front doors, and spend another family event making myself invisible, just like I'd spent the last 31 years quietly leaving every room where it was obvious I wasn't wanted. Instead, I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my phone. "Who are you calling?" my mother asked, smiling for everyone else's benefit instead of mine. "The hotel manager," she said with a laugh. "Your father's on the board. These people work for us." Olivia grabbed Ethan's arm and rolled her eyes. "Oh my God," she laughed. "She actually thinks she has influence here." I never took my eyes off my mother's face. I dialed the number. The call connected on the first ring. "Rebecca," I said. "This is Claire Bennett." "Good afternoon, Ms. Bennett," Rebecca Lynn, Vice President of Guest Relations for Pacific Hotel Group, answered immediately. Her voice was calm, professional, and completely without ceremony. "How may I assist you today?" "Please remove every executive privilege connected to Thomas Bennett's corporate account," I said. "Every room upgrade, every complimentary service, every bar authorization, everything." I want a global suspension effective immediately. Understood, Ms. Bennett, Rebecca replied without hesitation. It's being processed now. Thank you, Rebecca. I ended the call. The hotel lobby itself never became silent. A lobby that size is always filled with conversations, rolling suitcases, and people coming and going. But around our little group, everything suddenly felt strangely quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens when strangers nearby realize they're watching something important unfold and decide it's worth pretending not to stare. My father slowly lowered his phone. Then he laughed. It was the same laugh I'd heard him use during board meetings whenever a younger employee said something he considered both amusing and completely ridiculous. It was the laugh of a man who had spent his entire life believing power could never disappear. Nice try, Claire. He walked confidently to the front desk with the relaxed swagger of someone who had never once been told no by a hotel. He placed his black metal VIP card onto the polished marble counter. The sharp metallic click echoed clearly. Don't pay attention to her, he told the receptionist. Presidential suite for executive rooms, champagne on arrival. You know our arrangement. The receptionist picked up the card. She swiped it. The terminal made a short electronic sound. A single beep. The kind of sound a system makes while checking its records before making a decision. Then another tone. The screen flashed bright red. I watched the color slowly rise up my father's neck. It started at the collar and steadily crept upward. Run it again, he said. She did. Another red screen. I'm very sorry, Mr. Bennett, the receptionist said carefully. The system shows your account has been placed under a global suspension. The machine's broken. He leaned both hands against the front desk. Run it manually, my father demanded. You know exactly who I am. Just then, the frosted glass doors behind the front desk swung open. The general manager stepped out. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to go back to the beginning. That moment at the front desk wasn't where the story started. It was where everything finally came to a head. If I only tell you about the card being declined, you'll never understand why it mattered so much or why I was completely prepared for it. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 31 years old. I earned a master's degree in hotel administration and real estate management from Cornell University. At my graduation dinner, my father described it as a practical degree for people who don't expect to be in the room where the real decisions get made. That pretty much summed up the way he saw me. For the past 4 years, I've worked as a senior asset manager for a private hospitality investment firm. It's the kind of company regular consumers have never heard of because it operates through holding companies instead of public branding. Through those holdings, we own major interests in 14 luxury hotels spread across Hawaii, the mainland, and 2 international markets. The reason I'm telling you about my job is because it mattered in ways my family never realized. My grandmother, Charlotte Bennett, passed away in April at the age of 83. She stayed sharp almost until the very end. She had the clear mind of someone who had spent decades quietly observing the people around her, forming opinions she kept to herself until the day she finally had the means to act on them. Her fortune came from real estate and hospitality investments. Back in 1987, one of her friends from her Thursday Bridge group convinced her to invest in a small Hawaiian resort company. The friend passed away years ago. The investment didn't. After 36 years of compounded growth, reinvested dividends, and 2 major acquisitions, that original investment had grown into a controlling 51% ownership stake in Pacific Hotel Group Holdings. Among the properties owned by that company was the Grand Hawaiian Resort, the very hotel where I was now standing with a canceled reservation and a carry-on suitcase. My father had known about those shares for years. He simply assumed they'd become his one day. He carried that assumption with the effortless confidence of a man who'd spent his entire life being the loudest voice in every room and eventually confused being loud with being important. What he didn't know, and what nobody else in the family knew, was that my grandmother's estate attorney had officially filed the transfer paperwork in Maui County at 9:14 the previous morning. I found out 33 minutes later, at 9:47 a.m. While I was standing in my bedroom deciding which pair of shoes to pack, my cell phone rang. The caller was Patricia Nakamura. She'd spent 31 years practicing estate and trust law in Honolulu and had personally handled my grandmother's legal affairs for the last 9 years. The transfer became effective this morning, Patricia told me. As of today, 51% of Pacific Hotel Group Holdings now belongs to you. I'm emailing the documents as we speak. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I'm sorry, I said. Me? Yes, Patricia answered. Your grandmother was extremely specific. If you'd like, I can read the exact language she included. Please do. Patricia read it aloud. Most of the document was standard legal language about shares, trusts, and fiduciary responsibilities. But near the end, tucked between all the formal legal wording, my grandmother had personally added one sentence. It read, Asterisk, Claire worked for everything she has. The rest of this family worked only to preserve their own comfort. I intend to divide my estate accordingly. Asterisk. I just sat there holding the phone. She never told anyone, I whispered. No, Patricia replied. She made it very clear she did not want the family informed beforehand. I imagine that would have complicated things. I couldn't help smiling. That's certainly one way to put it. I finished packing. I boarded my flight. I didn't tell a single member of my family what had happened. Partly because Charlotte had asked for it that way. Partly because she was right. But mostly because after 31 years of being a Bennett, I'd learned something important. The right moment to reveal information isn't when people can explain it away. It's when they have to experience it. As it turned out, the lobby of the Grand Hawaiian Resort was the perfect place for that lesson. To understand why I was ready for that moment, though, you need to understand the years that led up to it. The first thing you should know about the Bennett family is that everything runs on attention. My father, Thomas, creates it. My mother, Diane, decides where it goes. Olivia happily uses every bit of it. As for me, in the family's internal accounting, I was never the main character. I was the rounding error. There wasn't one dramatic event I could point to and say, that's when everything changed. Nothing ever exploded. It simply faded. Year after year, little by little. My accomplishments were acknowledged with quick comments before the conversation moved on. My needs were treated like inconveniences. Olivia was born 2 years after me, and from the day she arrived, she became the center of the family story. She was beautiful, the kind of beautiful people couldn't stop mentioning at every family dinner. She inherited my mother's social grace and my father's confidence. More importantly, she had an incredible ability to make anyone she talked to feel like the most important person in the room. It was a remarkable gift. She just never gave it away for free. I was different. I was quiet, organized. I noticed details other people overlooked, and I remembered them. When I was around 12, my mother called it overthinking. I prefer calling it paying attention. At 18, I left for Cornell. Every time I came home during breaks, I somehow became the person everyone relied on whenever something needed to be researched, organized, coordinated, or quietly fixed. I was good at solving problems. And asking me cost my family a lot less than hiring someone else. After my grandmother's second fall, I managed her medications for the next 3 years. When she lost her driver's license, I drove her to Bridge every Thursday. On Sundays, while my parents traveled and Olivia always seemed to have something more important to do, I sat with Charlotte on the porch of her home in Kahala. She'd make roasted macadamia nuts from a recipe she'd been using since 1962. We'd eat together while she talked. She talked about the things she'd built, the things she'd lost, the things she'd learned. And more than anything else, she talked about the people who would one day inherit everything she'd spent her life creating. Charlotte Bennett had a great deal to say during those Sunday afternoons. My grandmother told me about the first investment my father ever lost money on, the one she quietly bailed him out of without him even asking. She talked about all the years she'd watched her own son confuse spending money with accomplishing something. When she spoke about Olivia, it was with the tone people use for someone who's undeniably beautiful but whose character they never fully trust. She always spoke about me differently. One afternoon, about 6 months before she passed away, we were sitting on her porch overlooking the ocean, eating the roasted macadamia and nuts she'd been making for decades from the same old recipe. You see things clearly, she told me. You've always seen them clearly. She kept watching the waves as she spoke. This family has never appreciated that gift because honesty makes people uncomfortable when they've spent their lives believing their own version of the truth. I didn't know what to say. I'm going to fix that, she said quietly, in the only way that really matters. At the time, I assumed she meant emotionally. I thought she was simply letting me know she appreciated everything I'd done for her. I was wrong. She meant something much bigger. The months leading up to that trip to Hawaii had been building towards something, and none of what happened at the hotel came out of nowhere. The first warning sign came in February. Olivia announced her engagement to Ethan Foster during what my mother described as a small family dinner at my parents' house in Kahala. Whenever my mother called something a small family dinner, it usually meant she'd already planned an elaborate event without telling anyone. When I flew in from the mainland, I walked into a dining room set for 12 guests, a catering company I'd never seen before working in the kitchen, and the news that I was expected to help pay for the engagement celebration. "You have a good income," my mother said. "And it's not like you're spending it on anything important." The engagement party ended up costing me $3,400. I paid without arguing. Olivia was still my sister. Back then, I hadn't fully accepted something I'd spent years refusing to see. Nothing I contributed to my family was ever treated like an investment. Every sacrifice I made produced exactly zero return except permission to keep sacrificing. The second warning came in April, during the week my grandmother died. I had already been in Honolulu for nearly 2 weeks. I stayed in the guest room at Charlotte's house, coordinated with hospice nurses, spoke with her doctors, managed medications, and handled whatever needed to be done. My parents arrived for the final 4 days. Olivia flew in for the funeral service and left the very same afternoon because she had a dress fitting she didn't want to miss. During the reception after the funeral, I listened as my mother told 3 different people that Charlotte and Olivia had been especially close during the last years of her life. I stood quietly near the kitchen eating roasted macadamia nuts. I didn't correct her. What would have been the point? I'd already realized my family had spent decades creating their own version of reality. A funeral reception wasn't the place to tear that story apart. The third warning wasn't really the trip to Hawaii itself. It was the way the entire trip had been planned. Olivia decided she wanted a luxury weekend in Maui. 10 days. Nearly 30 guests. An extravagant celebration my father proudly described as a proper Bennett family event. As far as he was concerned, it wasn't just an engagement celebration. It was a public display of the Bennett family's success. I wasn't really included. I was an afterthought. A few days before the trip, Olivia texted me. "Mom says you should come to Hawaii. You'll need to book your own room though. The hotel's basically full." So I booked my own room. 5 nights. Ocean view. $1,100 a night. A total of $5,500 charged to my personal credit card. Even though I was a Bennett. And even though Pacific Hotel Group already owned the Grand Hawaiian Resort. I still didn't tell anyone about my connection to the company because, at that point, it didn't seem relevant. Then Patricia Nakamura called me on the morning of July 14th. Suddenly, that connection became the single most important fact of the entire weekend. The general manager of the resort was Daniel Sullivan. He'd managed the Grand Hawaiian for 11 years. He knew Pacific Hotel Group inside and out. Earlier that morning, about 2 hours before my flight landed, corporate headquarters had emailed him to explain that control of the company had officially transferred to a new majority shareholder. Her name was Claire Bennett. She would be arriving that afternoon. And she was to be treated accordingly. Daniel walked through the frosted glass doors behind the reception desk with the calm confidence of someone who already knew exactly what had to be done. He looked across the lobby until he spotted me. When our eyes met, he gave me a slow, respectful nod. It wasn't the nod of someone greeting a hotel guest. It was the nod of someone acknowledging the person who now signed off on his performance reviews. Then he turned toward my father. "Mr. Bennett," he said politely, "your executive privileges have been permanently revoked by the holding company's new majority shareholder." He paused for just a moment. "The presidential suite, along with all 4 executive guest rooms, has been canceled effective immediately." Daniel spoke with the patience of someone who had delivered difficult news many times before. "If you'd still like to keep those rooms tonight, I can authorize a personal reservation for $25,000. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp. It was more like the noise someone makes when their entire understanding of a situation suddenly collapses. "Dad," Olivia said quickly in the calm voice she always used whenever she wanted problems to disappear, "just put it on the Amex. Ethan's family gets here in 40 minutes. My father frowned. He reached into his jacket. Out came his American Express Platinum card. I'd seen him use that card for over 20 years. He treated it almost like a badge of honor. He loved mentioning it whenever conversations drifted toward money. What he didn't know was that earlier that same morning, during my conversation with Patricia Nakamura, I'd learned something else. The card was carrying more than $340,000 in outstanding debt, and several required payments had already been missed. He handed the card to the receptionist. She ran it through the terminal. The machine processed the transaction for 3 long seconds. Click. She quietly tore off the receipt. Without saying a word, she handed the card back. Declined. Daniel lowered his voice. "I'm sorry, sir. There are insufficient funds." The sound my mother made next wasn't a sentence. It wasn't even a word. It started deep in her chest and escaped as something raw, a sound I'd never heard an adult make before. It echoed off every marble wall in the lobby. "Thomas," she whispered. "What is happening?" Behind us, another group of guests had already begun arriving. Nearly 20 members of Ethan's family were walking through the front entrance. Ethan took a single step backward, then another. They weren't hurried steps. They were slow, thoughtful ones, the kind a person takes while quickly weighing the costs against the benefits and realizing the answer isn't in his favor. He picked up his suitcase. He looked at Olivia with an expression that wasn't quite regret and wasn't exactly an apology either. It looked more like the face of a man who had suddenly realized the family he'd married into wasn't the family he'd been led to believe existed. "I need to call my parents," he said quietly. Then he headed for the entrance. "Ethan." Olivia's voice rose higher than I'd ever heard it. "Ethan, wait. This is a misunderstanding." She did something. "Please, Ethan." The revolving door kept turning. He didn't come back. Olivia collapsed onto one of the lobby benches. And I want to be precise about that, because it matters. It wasn't an act. I'd spent my entire life watching Olivia perform carefully calculated emotional scenes whenever they benefited her. This wasn't one of them. This was real. Everything she'd spent months building, the perfect engagement weekend, the flowers, the rehearsal dinner, the carefully crafted image of the Bennett family as wealthy, respected, and worthy of joining, had completely fallen apart in less than 5 minutes inside that hotel lobby. As I watched her, I didn't feel satisfaction. What I felt was more complicated than that. It was a quiet sadness that comes from watching someone realize the solid ground beneath them had never really been solid in the first place, even if they were the one who helped create the illusion. My mother turned back toward me. The performance she'd worn all afternoon was gone. The polite disappointment. The carefully controlled criticism. The quiet little cuts she'd mastered over decades. All of it had vanished. For the first time in 31 years, I saw something completely honest on her face. "Claire." Her voice cracked. "Please. We're your family. We don't have anywhere else to go." I looked at her for a long moment. I remembered the motel she'd told me to find. I remembered spending 6 hours squeezed into a middle seat. I remembered the way she'd looked down at my carry-on suitcase, as if it proved I didn't belong there. And I remembered her words. Asterisk, maybe next time you'll learn not to embarrass this family. Asterisk. My grandmother made her decision yesterday morning, I said calmly. She left her 51% controlling interest in Pacific Hotel Group to the only person in this family who actually earned what they have. My mother's hands were still reaching toward me. I glanced at them. "You told me to figure it out, Mom," I said. "I think you should take your own advice." Then I turned away. I walked back to the reception desk and gave the clerk my name. She checked the reservation. Whatever appeared on her screen immediately changed the way she stood. "Welcome, Miss Bennett," she said with genuine respect. "Your oceanfront suite is ready. Mr. Sullivan will personally escort you." I picked up my carry-on. 2 hotel security officers quietly stepped into position nearby, along with members of the guest services team who were clearly trained to handle situations exactly like this without creating a public spectacle. Behind me, I heard my father threatening lawsuits. I heard Olivia repeatedly calling Ethan's phone over and over again without getting an answer. I walked toward the elevators. Daniel Sullivan joined me, calm as ever. "Your grandmother was incredibly thorough," he said quietly. "She anticipated that this transition might be difficult." "She anticipated almost everything," I replied. He nodded. "She also left you a personal letter. It's waiting in the executive office whenever you're ready." The elevator doors opened. "I'll read it tomorrow morning," I said. "Tonight, I'd just like a little peace." "Of course." The doors closed. As the elevator climbed, every sound from the lobby disappeared. My mother's voice. My father shouting. Olivia's crying. All of it faded away. The elevator carried me upward through a building my grandmother had owned since 1987. She'd watched me for 31 years without saying very much. Then, without fanfare or dramatic speeches, she'd quietly decided I deserved everything. The next morning, I read her letter. I ordered coffee at 7 o'clock and sat beside the window overlooking the Pacific Ocean while the resort was still wrapped in that peaceful silence before the day truly began. Daniel personally delivered the envelope. It was a simple cream-colored envelope with my name written across the front in Charlotte's unmistakable handwriting. Her handwriting was steady, elegant, and old-fashioned, the handwriting of someone who'd learned to write beautifully long before anyone expected it. The letter itself was only 3 paragraphs long. I won't repeat all of it. Some words belong only to the person they were written for. But I'll tell you the final sentence because I've read it every morning since that day. It tells you everything you need to know about Charlotte Bennett. Asterisk, I didn't leave this to you because I loved you more. Asterisk. Asterisk, I left it to you because you're the only one in this family who understood that the only things truly worth owning are the things you've earned yourself. Asterisk. Asterisk, everything else is only temporary architecture. Asterisk. What happened afterward was significant, though far less dramatic than what had happened in the lobby. Within 24 hours, my father hired a Honolulu attorney named Michael Donovan, a lawyer who specialized in estate litigation. 48 hours later, Patricia Nakamura forwarded me a copy of the legal challenge he'd filed against my grandmother's will. The only note Patricia added was one short sentence. Asterisk, standard opening move. We're ready. Asterisk. The case moved through the courts over the following months. In September, every challenge was dismissed. Patricia's office submitted my grandmother's complete medical records covering the final 2 years of her life. They showed no evidence of cognitive decline whatsoever. Her longtime physician, Dr. David Mercer, who had treated her for 34 years in Honolulu, provided detailed records documenting her mental competence during every monthly visit. His notes were so consistent and thorough that my father's legal argument never had a realistic chance. Judge Karen Whitmore, who had served on the bench for more than 2 decades, rejected the challenge in a written opinion that repeatedly emphasized one word: intent. She used it 4 separate times. The financial problems my father tried so hard to hide turned out to be far worse than anyone realized. The $340,000 on his American Express account was only one piece of a much larger problem. For more than 8 years, Thomas Bennett had quietly borrowed against the future inheritance he assumed was guaranteed. His salary couldn't support the lifestyle he insisted on maintaining. By the time my grandmother's estate passed to me instead of him, the entire financial structure he'd built around that expectation collapsed. There were 2 personal loans, a business line of credit, and even a mortgage against the Kahala house that my mother hadn't known existed. Without the inheritance he'd counted on, none of it could be sustained. In November, my father sold the Kahala house. A short time later, my mother moved into a condominium. In December, my mother sent me an email. It contained only one sentence. Asterisk, I hope you're satisfied. Asterisk. I read it twice. Then I closed it without replying. There wasn't anything left to say. Sometimes silence says more than any response ever could. Olivia and Ethan eventually got back together. I only know that because Lauren, a mutual friend who had been invited to the original engagement weekend, reached out to me in August with a thoughtful message apologizing for everything that had happened. She mentioned that they were engaged again. This time, they kept it quiet. There was no luxury resort, no extravagant weekend, no public performance, just a small ceremony. I wasn't invited. I never expected to be. By then, my life had already moved in a completely different direction. Working alongside Patricia Nakamura, I spent 6 weeks building a new leadership structure for Pacific Hotel Group. Today, I serve as chair of the board. Daniel Sullivan is still the general manager of the Grand Hawaiian Resort. He's exceptional at what he does. Every Monday morning, he sends me a detailed property report. I read every page with the same careful attention my grandmother once taught me during those quiet Sunday afternoons on her porch. Whenever I travel to Hawaii, I still stay in the same oceanfront suite. I still order coffee at 7 every morning. And I still sit by the window enjoying those few peaceful moments before the resort comes alive for the day. Charlotte's letter remains in the top drawer of the desk. I've never framed it. I've never displayed it on a wall. It simply stays there, close enough for me to reach whenever I want to read it again. The truth is, I don't need to read it very often anymore. When you spend years building something with your own effort, when every opportunity is earned through your own work, when you've learned to walk into rooms where no one planned to hand you anything, eventually you stop needing reminders of why you belong there. You simply know.